The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the story of 3 children living in a house of squalor alone, raising themselves while their mother lived comfortably nearby. Here's the story. This story will break your heart. It will make you sad, but it will also have you asking so many questions. Kelli Bryant was living in a townhome in Oakland County, Michigan, with her 4 children. Then she moved sometime around 2020 or 2021. When she moved, one of the 4 children went with her. The other 3 stayed. They didn't stay with their father or any relative or any other adult. They stayed in that townhome alone, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, not knowing or understanding basic hygiene. The house became filthy, yet the children stayed inside 24/7, 365. And now finally in 2025, they have been rescued. That image that you just saw, adults with hazmat suits on, going into a home that young children were living in and growing up in, alone by themselves. It's really unreal. There are a lot more details in this story, in this case, in this investigation. I want you to take a listen to Karen McDonald. She's the prosecutor out in Oakland County.
Today, the charges are 3 counts of child abuse in the first degree. This is the most serious charge for child abuse, and if convicted, Ms. Bryant could face a sentence of up to life in prison. In the swear-to this morning, on the record, it was stated that in 2019, suspect Kelli Bryant was living at the home, which I'm not disclosing the address at this time, in Pontiac, Michigan, with her 4 children. At some point between 20 and 2021, the suspect moved out of her home, leaving 3 of her children abandoned in that location, while 1 of her children went to live with their father. On February 14th, 2025, police were called to the home by the landlord. Police learned that the landlord was concerned for the welfare of Ms. Bryant, who had not paid rent on the property since October of 2024. Police entered with the landlord and discovered her 3 children, ages 12, 13, and 15. Her daughters were hiding in a bathroom that was filled with feces, piles of trash, and completely non-functional, while her son was hiding in another room. Police were astonished to find anyone in the location because it appeared to be uninhabitable, with piles of garbage and refuse several feet high, including large amounts of human excrement. The children were afraid to come out of their hiding places and to speak with the police. Police had to repeatedly advise the children that they were there to help and they were safe. The children's bodies and clothing were covered in feces, and the girls had difficulty physically walking outside of the residence. In addition to the physical difficulty, they appeared to be and were immediately overstimulated upon leaving the residence. All 3 children were transported via ambulance to the hospital and showed signs of severe neglect. At the hospital, the children struggled with completing basic hygiene tasks like flushing a toilet and brushing their teeth because they had not done it in years. The children were forensically interviewed and described having virtually no physical contact with their mother, suspect Bryant, or the outside world in several years. The girls had not left the residence in several years, and her son had only left the home to go into the yard approximately 2 times, never venturing away from the house more than to check the mailbox. During his interview, her son stated that he would text their mother when their food supply was running low and she would have food delivered to the residence. The children shared that during the years they were concealed in the home, suspect Bryant failed to provide toilet paper, soap, or shampoo. The defendant instructed the kids that they were not to answer the door or leave the house. All three children expressed fear about what their mother's response would be if they left the home. Defendant concealed the children from family and friends and lied about who was caring for the kids and their whereabouts. The defendant took the active steps of lying and concealing to make sure the children went undiscovered, and she took these actions knowing that her children would suffer serious physical and emotional harm as a result. Those are the statements made in the swear-to this morning. And again, these are allegations.
You know, I've covered, and this is a strange analogy, but I think it brings home the point here, of cases where we find dogs abandoned or tied up in a yard or abused, and there's this outpouring of outrage. And that's the best analogy I can have to you. They were treated like abandoned animals, like they didn't matter. And the outrage from that I'm feeling, and I think folks at home are feeling, and the community's feeling, is like through the roof. Like, how could you do this to three children, human beings? Let's get to the first question in our investigation. And you saw the conditions. You know what they went through for years. How did they survive? How did these children survive? Let's bring in our guest. Joining me on phone, the man leading the investigating agency in Michigan, Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard is with us, and author and certified mental health counselor who specializes in child abuse, neglect, and trauma. Exactly what we're talking about here, Sharonda Brown. Thank you both. Sheriff, I want to begin with you. From your perspective, I mean, in your work, you see horrible things. I mean, that's part of the job, right? How, from your perspective, did these kids physically survive what we're looking at right now and what was described?
You know, it's hard to wrap your head around because, you know, they had no guidance, no adult supervision, no education, no hygiene, no grooming, no hugs, no love. I mean, it's just really hard to take that in and imagine it not for a week, not for a month, but for years. I have, as you said, seen a lot of horrific things. I've been in this business 37 years, and I've never seen anything of this horrific nature with this protracted of a calendar in terms of how long it went on and what kinds of things these kids had to deal with without any love or any adult around.
You mentioned an important word there, without any love either. You know, there's the physical part, but children need love. They
100%.
They need it. Sharonda Brown, I think when this began, the children, when they were found, I think were 14, 15, and 12. I think those are the ages, but you go back 4 years, 8 years old, 10 years old, 11 years old. How did they survive this?
When kids are abused and neglected, a lot of the times they are conditioned in those circumstances. So what keeps them surviving is the fact that this is all they know. They don't realize they're being abused, neglected, or abandoned until society tells them or till someone else tells them that this is what they're experiencing. These things did not begin at the time that we believe they began. We've heard about the abandonment at the ages of allegedly 10 and 7 and 8, but it's possible that these things have been going on their entire lives. When you think about the age of 10-year-olds, hygiene, by that time, they are taught to take care of themselves. They're taught to even put a pizza in the oven or to do certain things, life skills. But it sounds like these lack of life skills and support started way before the mother allegedly abandoned them. So they survived based on the environment in which they were raised. That is how they survived. And the hope is what kept them going and kept them waiting for day one, which is why they were extremely startled when they saw the circumstances outside of just the home they were living in. That is probably more shocking to them than the situation they were in.
Sheriff, I mean, simple things like sleeping. I mean, hazmat suits to go in there, right? The smell had to be overwhelming. The filth, the dirt everywhere, and the description of feces everywhere. Where were these kids even sleeping?
Yeah, you're right. It was terrible. As the video you just showed, that was my search and rescue team donning hazmat gear to go in and take, evidentiary photos of the scene. Absolutely disturbing and disgusting. They were sleeping on the floor, sleeping on pizza boxes. There was kind of one, what you might call a mattress on the floor. But again, think about this. No washing, no running toilet, no showers. And this is going on for years. So imagine the smells in there, piles of garbage 3 and 4 feet high, literally everything covered with feces. You had to pick spots to try to walk, and you couldn't avoid it. And so it's hard to imagine little kids in there. As I said when we talked last time, you'd see those terrible movie videos of dogs and when they pull on your heartstrings trying to get donations. Way worse, and lasted for years, and these are kids.
Sharonda, what are your thoughts about surviving this? There's 3 of them. It's not one child by him or herself. There's 3 of them, relatively close in age. What are your thoughts about that dynamic in persevering through this?
The hope that they had for their mother to come back and keeping them together was what helped them survive and bond. Stockholm Syndrome happens when you become connected to your abuser as a coping skill. And you do that out of fear, and you bond in that process. And so being able to call her and say, hey, we're out of food, and then getting the food, while some people may say that's very neglectful, to them, that was what kept them close, was that hope. And they began to survive with each other and knowing that, hey, we're not in this alone, versus someone who would have been there by themselves would have had a lot harder time to survive. But they had each other during that process, and the breadcrumbing that she provided was what kept them hopeful. And when they became distrustful of other people, a little nervous, because there's that fear with Stockholm Syndrome that something bad is going to happen to you if you speak up against your abuser. And again, these are children who probably did not realize that their mother was an abuser or even neglectful or abandoning them as they were trying to keep their word towards them. And that's the power of abuse. Mentally, it will definitely make you believe you're doing something wrong should you decide to go against what your abuser is doing. And I think that is what kept them bonded and kept them connected.
Okay, guests are going to stay with us. We have a lot more to get to. Coming up next, where was their mom?
I don't believe anyone knows where you have been staying, madam. There's no consistent history.
The Court TV podcast will return.
It appears that Ms. Bryant is not employed and that her resident status may be transient. So I consider her, and I think that the facts of this case portray her as a potential flight risk.
I agree with you, Ms. Green, that one could opine that she's transient. She's from here, she's from there. We don't know where she resides. I'm concerned pretrial services has indicated 2 different reported addresses for you. I don't believe anyone knows where you have been staying, madam. There's no consistent history.
So this accused squalor mom, transient, no real address, but there's a townhome with her children in it, but she's not there. Brings us to the next question in our investigation. Where was their mom? We know where the kids were. They didn't leave that house. They did not leave that house, but where was her mom? Still with me in Michigan, Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard, and joining me, Michigan prosecutor, you recognize him, prosecuted the Shonda Vander Ark child abuse case, and that we covered right here on Court TV, involving another mother that became public enemy #1 for everyone that was watching that case. Matt Roberts is with us. Thank you both so much. I want to play this first. This is Sarah Michaels from the Scripps News Group, who did a little investigating about where mom was. Here's what she found out.
So many have been wondering where Bryant herself lived while her children sat in isolation. Court documents show 2 addresses. At one of them, I talked to a woman who confirmed Bryant was living here. Were you guys living together? The house is about 6 minutes away from where Bryant's children were. The woman behind the door telling me that Bryant always told them the kids were with their dad, and Bryant actually played with other people's kids.
Wow. Sheriff, is it true that we believe she was living just 6 minutes away from all this squalor where these 3 kids are suffering and living in their own feces?
Our detectives found her at a different residence in Pontiac. That's where we arrested her.
And do we have any idea of the type of life she was living? Was it clear? I mean, was she in squalor?
By no indication, she was not in squalor that we've seen. It was, I don't know. All I can characterize it as she left the kids in a situation no one would leave a pet in, and then went on with her life.
Matt Roberts, looking at this mother, what is your initial reaction? I'm really interested to know what you think about the way this mother acted and what she did and how these children were treated.
Well, good evening, Vinnie. It's good to be here. It's just unconscionable. It really just from all the child abuse cases I've seen, and even you mentioned the Vanda Art case, in some respects, this is almost just worse. I mean, the abandonment here, and I think it's the extended period of time that's really what's most shocking here. And for these kids to be in that situation for as long as they were, I just don't understand how one human, I shouldn't be surprised after the number of years that I've been doing it. And I know Sheriff Bouchard doing great work over there in Oakland County, sees some cases like this too. It shouldn't surprise us, but along comes a case like this, and it does.
Now, what do you make of the fact that she's living close by, that she's playing with other people's children, yet her children not allowed to leave, not even allowed to go outside, afraid to go outside?
Well, it seems that suggests some level of she's trying to still control the situation and try to keep an eye on the situation. That there has to be some, obviously there's an awareness that she needs to, provide some minimal level of support, whatever she felt that needed to be. But I suspect it's motivated in part by selfishness on her part, that she really just does not want to get found out. She had to take some steps to make sure that other people were not asking the questions. I don't know how you could pull that off for as long as that she did, but she was able to. So I suspect it's more for that keeping an eye on type of the situation, and she would see if something was happening, and if somebody tried to provide some care for the kids would be my guess.
And Sheriff, looking at the way this all went down, she's 6 minutes away. We know the children were getting food. I mean, I saw all those pizza boxes coming out, and it was mom that was coordinating all of this. Was she? How much communication, if any, was there between her and the children?
Very little. The communication was between the oldest, the boy. They were all afraid to do anything, to leave, to go out. The young boy, who was the oldest in the situation, went out twice, once to check the mail, and once because he wanted to see what the grass felt like, which is heartbreaking. So everybody else was, the girls were afraid to do anything, to go out, to communicate with anybody else. So they had no human adult contact, let alone loving contact, or guidance, or education.
Matt, miraculously, these children survived. And to me, it's unreal how they were able to persevere through all of this. But as a prosecutor looks at a case like this, and you're trying to understand it, like, try to wrap your head around it, and you're evaluating the case, is there anything from the other side that could change your mind about what happened here and have some level of, okay, there is some level of explanation, mitigation where, there's something else going on here?
Well, certainly as a prosecutor, you never want to get too complacent and believe that you always know all the facts and circumstances. So you do have to be careful, but it's difficult to fathom what possible explanation could explain the length of time. If nothing else, the nature of it is shocking in and of itself. But as much as anything, it's the length of time that this was going on, that there just is no explanation, I think, that could be reasonable. But again, you can't be foreclosed to the possibility that something will be presented. Obviously, it's too early to speculate on what the defense might be in this case, but and you always want to be thinking about that as a prosecutor. But I think you're pretty well equipped to handle to a jury if when it gets to that point, to present to them and say there is no explanation that you could think of here that would possibly justify this beyond some type of insanity defense or something like that, and who knows if that's where this is going.
Yeah, but it seems, and Sheriff, the way the children were discovered was for non-payment of rent, created some concern for the landlord. So that tells me that she had been paying rent for years.
Yeah, she had been paying rent, and in the beginning, the food deliveries were maybe a little more regular, but towards the end, they were less regular, and even sometimes, a loaf of bread that would be required to last for many days. So, that was kind of going on while the different other things, as you mentioned, the lack of rent payment stopped somewhere in October. And the landlord hadn't had contact with the tenant, which was the woman, according, to the documents and in his mind. So he actually contacted us to do a welfare check for the woman that he thought something might be wrong. She hasn't, been in contact, and she hasn't been paying her rent. And so we went to the home thinking we were checking the welfare of a young lady, the mom, and in fact found this horrific situation had been going on for years with her full knowledge and participation.
Sheriff Michael Bouchard, we appreciate your time. I know you're busy keeping folks safe out in Oakland County, and we appreciate your time. Matt is going to stay with us. Up next, how did this go on for so many years?
This is the Court TV Podcast.
I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of 3 children living in a house of squalor by themselves after their mother abandoned them. It's outrageous. It's heartbreaking. Here's the story.
What was happening inside this townhouse in Oakland County, Michigan was unthinkable. A house of filth, clutter, disgust, and children. 3 children living alone for years, somehow surviving, but never going outside, never going to school, never getting any parental love, guidance, or affection. It's a tragic story. It has the community confused, angry, and heartbroken. And now the public and prosecutors have a lot of questions for the mother of these 3 children who were abandoned.
So there's a lot of parts to a child's life growing up, right? There's home, there's your parents, there's friends, there's school. But as you heard, they weren't going to school. I want you to take a listen to the sheriff. We just had him on, but he spoke previously about these children not going to school.
Trash was piled, in some places 3 and 4 foot high. Everything was covered with feces and trash. The toilet had become non-functional, and the bathtub was filled with feces. That's the kind of situation these poor kids had been living in for years, not just hours or days, for years. And so when you have the complete lack of hygiene, a complete breakdown of basic living conditions that they were subjected to, and to get a little deeper into that, detectives have narrowed down the initial abandonment they believe to be somewhere in the spring to summer of 2020. Obviously, COVID played a little part in the disconnect potentially with schools and school communications. In 2020, the mother dropped off some trash bags, gloves, and Febreze, and that was about the last thing related to hygiene. 2020, in the height of COVID, okay? Towards the end, the children apparently were getting a loaf of bread dropped off that was intended to last 3 to 4 days.
2020. They were just rescued. It's about 2020. Brings us to the next question in our investigation. How did this go on for so many years? Year after year after year. Joining me, she's reported on the case. Script News Group's Sarah Michaels is with us, and Michigan prosecutor who prosecuted the Shonda Vander Ark child abuse case, Matt Roberts, is with us as well. Thank you both. Sarah, let me begin with you. You're investigating the story, this case. You're in the neighborhood. How did this go on for so long with no one noticing?
Yeah. Vinnie, that's the question that everyone continues to ask. So we know this. You just heard the Sheriff Bouchard say that the kids were allegedly abandoned sometime in 2020. Now, originally, I learned that there were actually 4 children inside of that house. And allegedly, the mom was living in the house with the children, I found out through court documents, until around 2020. When she left, she took one of the children with her. That child has a different father than the other 3 children. That child went to stay with their father. The other 3 children allegedly stayed in the house, completely abandoned, for, as you heard, about 5 years. Now, a lot of people have been asking, where was their father? Well, I actually went to court and I found out through documents that around 2022, the mother filed a PPO against the father of those 3 children, and he went to prison until about 2022. I also found out through court documents that when the father got out, he tried to get custody of the children. He tried to make contact. He even went through the court, but somehow, no one seems to know how this happened, the mom was still able to block the father from getting access to the children at all. I also spoke to the dad's dad, the paternal grandfather, over the phone this week. He tells me that they invited the mom and the children to multiple family events. They reached out multiple times, and the answer was always no.
Locked up and hidden, no one's seeing them. And it's interesting, Matt, it all starts during COVID, right? When everyone is staying in. And it's sort of normal, but then it just continued for these children. I'm wondering, Matt, from your perspective, in trying to understand what happened here and then having to prove something in court, are these children going to have to testify?
It seems unlikely. I think sort of the conditions and the photographs would speak for themselves. It's one of those cases as a prosecutor, you sort of joke and say, I'll play the video and admit a couple of photographs and rest. It won't come to that. Prosecutor McDonald's got a fantastic staff over there in Oakland County, and I'm sure they're going to put a tremendous case forward here. But I think they will do everything they can, recognizing the horrors that these kids have been through, to make sure that they're not then traumatized by, frankly, even seeing their mom might be traumatic after all this time and the circumstances coming up here. So I'm sure they will do everything they can not to. I think most of this kind of speaks for itself, so I think it can probably be done without it, and I'm sure that's at the foremost of the prosecutors' minds as they prepare this case to go to court.
Yeah, I hope they can, because that would not be good. That would not be a good situation for them to even be in the room, I think, with their mother at that point. Sarah, I know that you spoke with a neighbor who was telling you that the kids were actually yelling out of the window to the neighbor. I want to play a little piece of that.
Was it just that one time?
Maybe 2 or 3 times. They say, hey, nice car. But, and I might wave back at them, but that's it. There's no way that I could have known that they were in a terrible situation.
So, Sarah, these are townhouses. They're connected. And there were, I guess, no complaints about smells or garbage or anything else going on.
Mm-hmm. That has been really shocking and difficult for people to wrap their head around. Initially, when we heard about the story, we were asking that same question. How is it possible? We're talking about 5 years. We're also talking about 4 to 5 feet tall piles of trash, mold, and feces. How is it possible that no one living around there smelled that? I can tell you, I have been out to the condo unit myself at this point. I went out there before investigators opened up the windows and the doors. You truly could not smell anything.
Wow.
Now, they did go out there, they had on hazmat suits to clean it out. And Vinnie, as soon as they opened up the door and windows in those hazmat suits, the smell that came out of there, I have never in my life smelled anything like that. It was repugnant. It smelled like exactly what I described the scene to be. But before that, I can say from experience, you truly could not smell anything.
That's amazing. And one of the other things that the mother allegedly instructed the kids, don't answer the door. Because if someone knocked on the door, whether it's, a delivery or someone accidentally knocking the door, you open the door, you're going to see it, you're going to smell it, and something's going to happen. Let me ask you, Matt, mom had custody, dad was seemingly fighting for custody, was rebuked. Is there anyone else in this that would have any legal responsibility for what happened to those children?
Well, likely no, not in terms of legal responsibility here. There's, unfortunately no duty to act on behalf of a child for the most part, unless you are the actual caregiver for that child. But certainly from a moral standpoint, any relative here who just for 4 years or for the 3.5, 4 years, however long it was, decided to do nothing about this and just be satisfied with whatever answers the mother was giving. Those people have some questions to answer, but legal responsibility, no, the law really speaks only to a person who is the child's caregiver or parent or guardian, and that appears to be mom. And unfortunately, a parent can take some action to prohibit the access of the other parent under the right circumstances. And certainly it does appear that this mom was able to take advantage of that situation.
The other part of this hour we were talking about it was the school, and somehow I guess someone lost track of the kids. Like whether mom I think mom actually was telling the school that they had moved or something to that effect. But that was another potential way for someone to realize things aren't right. But no one from the school caught on to this.
Yeah, they're actually talking about changing the legislation in Michigan in light of this, saying that this was a massive error on the Michigan education system, saying that they want to change it so when you take a child out of school, you're not allowed to do so until you've provided proof that you've enrolled them in a different school. Had that happened in this scenario, many of people are saying that the children never would have been able to be abandoned and missing for so long.
And Matt, a lot of these types of cases that I've covered here at Court TV, including the Vanderhaar case, there's always talk about family services, that there was a case open. But here, I don't think there was even a case open. Nobody knew. Mom had custody, and no one's complaining because the kids are literally prisoners in their own home.
Yeah, it is kind of like what we saw in the Vanderhaar case, obviously in terms of time, a lot shorter there. Protective Services is a great organization. They do great work in the state of Michigan, but they are still a reactive agency for the most part. They rely on people to provide them with information, and unless somebody has given them some information, that they just don't have an opportunity to do that. The sad part is that all sources of reporting information for these types of abuse cases are kept confidential. So somebody could have spoken up here, and I get the mentality that you don't want to get involved and you don't want to say things and you don't want to go to court. It doesn't even have to come to that. You can report all of this anonymously in the state of Michigan. And please, if you suspect that something like this is going on in your community or to a child in your neighborhood or something of that nature, please report it to Protective Services so that they can find out about it.
Absolutely. Matt Roberts, is so great to catch up with you. Thank you so much. Sarah is going to stay with us when we come back. How do the kids recover?
The first thing we wanted to do is obviously get them safe and to get them clean and get them enclosed.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
As it relates to being in the house, the only one of the three that ever came out was the young boy, and he came out twice. Once because he wanted to feel the grass, which by itself is heartbreaking, and a second time to check the mail. So you wouldn't do this to an animal, let alone your child. So, just to hear that he came out to touch the grass, it's just crushing, soul crushing on so many levels.
The resiliency of these three children to survive, okay? That's survival, which brings me to the next question in our investigation, which takes us one step further. How do the kids recover? Can they? Will they? How? Still with me, Scripps News Group's Sarah Michaels, and joining me, author and certified mental health counselor who specializes in child abuse, neglect, and trauma, Sharonda Brown. Sarah, what are we hearing about the kids? And I know the sheriff described it somewhat. Is there any sort of information being released at all about how they are doing at this point?
Yeah. How the kids are doing is probably the part of the investigation that the sheriff and the prosecutor's office are being the most tight-lipped about, as they should. You want to respect the children's privacy after all these years and what they've gone through. I will say that we know that right after they were taken out of the house, they were taken to the hospital. And directly after that, they were taken to Care House, which is a local nonprofit where they received mental health treatment. I spoke to one of the therapists that worked with them, and they told me that the kids, they couldn't directly talk about it, but they said that for a situation like this, the children are doing as well as one might assume that they could be doing, but the impact of this, obviously, that is going to last for years and years. I also spoke to the dad of the children, so the paternal grandfather. He told me that they are quite shaken up, very confused, but once again, doing all right for what they've been through.
Confusion, I could imagine that confusion. Sharonda Brown, so they survived, okay? They survived these years, right? So now how do they get to that next level of recovery to have, I don't think their lives will ever be normal, but to get to a much better place, how do they get there?
It's going to be a long road because we got to get through the overstimulation, the confusion, as one stated, the fear. They have to get acclimated to the society that they now know is a new society. When we speak about not being able to walk because your toenails are too long, or we talk about poor hygiene, not being able to take care of yourself, or just the basic needs. So there has to be not just mental health treatment, but we're talking about behavioral health treatment. We're talking about, occupational therapy, learning how to just adjust, even in the society of being in a group home or even in foster care. So it's going to be a process, a long process. And I'm sure there's a lot of fear there. And there's this idea that they've abandoned their mom at this point because now they believe, oh, we've told on her. She told us not to leave the house, and we've left the house. So they probably believe they're in trouble on some level. So even getting through that, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of trust, and it's going to take a new development or just a redirection of everything they once knew as safety, because now they don't know what to trust and what not to trust.
Okay, so Sharonda, there's three of them, right? And I believe that sibling relationships are so important. You have a family, hopefully you have mom and dad together at some point, and then if everything goes as it should go, the parents will pass away before the children, and then you're left with your siblings. So looking ahead, these children having survived what they went through together, looking at the future, will they be close? Will it bring back bad memories for them to spend a lot of time together? How does that dynamic work? And what do you think will happen to what I believe are very important relationships with siblings?
they're definitely going to be close. They're going to be at the hip probably for the rest of their lives. And I think to even separate them at this point will be almost as traumatic as taking them out of a home that they once saw as safety. And it may not be safety for us because we're saying, hey, this is not okay. But for them, that was where they bonded. So they're going to be close forever. They're going to connect to each other forever. It's almost like the level of codependency that has been created for their survival. In the event that if they were separated, they will probably experience a lot of physical sickness and illness. So I think that closeness is definitely something that's important and is needed for them at this point. I don't know what the relationship will be like with the sibling that was removed from the home, but I do know that these three will definitely find survival within each other.
Sarah, how about the community? I can imagine, you know, when I was doing straight news, you have different stories, different days. Anytime we would do a story about animals that were found, the outpouring of support from the community would be through the roof. How about this community when they found out what these children had been through?
Yeah. Just like you said, the outpouring from the community throughout Oakland County has been overwhelming. The Sheriff Michael Bouchard saying he has never seen so many donations so quickly. As soon as the story came out, people from the community started going to the sheriff's office, bringing clothes, stuffed animals, any kind of goods that they could, supplies, education supplies for the children, knowing that they missed out on so many years of school. In fact, they received so many donations that the sheriff asked people to start making monetary donations. I believe that they're in the process right now of using those donations to set up a trust for the children so that long-term they have the support that they'll need. But the support from the community, Vinnie, has really been overwhelming, and that is one heartening thing that we've been able to see through this.
It's amazing. Sharonda, looking way in the future now for these children, if they find someone and they want to start a family, will that be healing for them to have children themselves to be able to raise?
It may be healing, it may be a disruption. I've seen it go so many different ways. When you have a separation from your parent and you've had to figure out how to survive in a situation like abandonment, it can go one of two ways. You can have an avoidant dismissive attachment style, which means dismissing love and care, but knowing you really want it. Or you can have an avoidant fearful style, which means you can become clingy and overbearing and even controlling, and sometimes like your abuser because you have a fear of being left. So it could go many ways. To create a secure attachment, it's going to take a balance of them realizing that whatever they've experienced is not their fault and learning a new way of having healthy dynamics and being able to take care of themselves.
Sharonda Brown, Sarah Michaels, really appreciate great insight, great reporting, Sarah. Thank you so much. You know, when I cover horrific stories like this, I always try to look for that small piece of something positive to take away. Here, it's the resiliency of these children. That ability to survive unthinkable conditions. If you think about it, it's actually pretty remarkable. Now, I hope those children get the same huge heaping of love that they deserve so they don't just survive, but flourish. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.